The crisp $50 bill landed in my lobster bisque with a sickening splash, sending droplets of orange cream onto my face. The silence that followed in the St. James dining room was deafening, louder than any scream I had ever heard. I sat frozen, feeling the hot liquid trickle down my cheek as 25 of Atlanta's most elite socialites stared at me. Some covered their mouths in mock horror, while others, like the woman sitting directly across from me, barely concealed their amusement. At the head of the long mahogany table, Winston St. James, the man who was supposed to be my future father-in-law, wiped his hands on a linen napkin as if he had just touched something filthy. He looked me dead in the eye and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his short-lived career. He called me street garbage in a borrowed dress. He thought he was discarding a gold digger. He had no idea he was declaring war on the very person holding the lifeline to his crumbling empire. My name is Simone, and at 29 years old, I have learned that silence is often the loudest weapon in the room. But before I tell you how I brought a billion-dollar dynasty to its knees with a single signature, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you have ever been underestimated or judged by people who thought they were better than you, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps share these stories of justice. The nightmare began exactly 45 minutes earlier. I had pulled my modest Honda Civic into the circular driveway of the St. James estate in Buckhead. The mansion looked more like a museum than a home, with its limestone columns and perfectly manicured hedges that seemed to judge you as you walked past. My boyfriend Jamal had squeezed my hand before we entered. He told me to just be myself, but his palm was sweaty and he refused to make eye contact. That should have been my first red flag. When the heavy oak doors opened, the rush of air conditioning hit me like a physical wall. Standing in the foyer was Vivian St. James. She was a former beauty queen who clung to her glory days with the help of excessive diamonds and a very expensive plastic surgeon. She did not smile. Her eyes scanned me from my hair down to my nude heels, stopping to analyze the fabric of my black dress. "Delivery is around the back, dear," she said, turning away before I could even speak. I felt my face burn. Jamal quickly stepped in, muttering that I was his girlfriend, not the caterer. Vivian turned back slowly, her eyebrows raised in feigned surprise. "Oh, I see," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I suppose with the lighting in here it is hard to tell the difference." "Welcome, Simone. Try not to touch the walls. We just had the silk wallpaper imported from Italy." I swallowed my pride and held out the gift bag I had brought. Inside was a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1982, a vintage wine worth more than $5,000. It was a rare bottle from my personal collection, something I thought a connoisseur like Winston would appreciate. But the bottle was old, and the label was slightly stained from decades of cellar aging. Winston St. James walked into the foyer at that moment. He was a large man who took up space not just physically but energetically. He glanced at the bag in my hand and wrinkled his nose. "What is this?" he asked, taking the bag with 2 fingers. I started to explain the vintage, but he cut me off. He pulled the bottle out, inspecting the dust on the glass. He let out a short, harsh laugh. "Did you find this in a dumpster on your way here, or did you buy it at a gas station? We do not drink vinegar in this house." He handed the bottle to a passing server, without even looking at him. "Throw this out, and wash your hands afterward." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that bottle cost more than the suit he was wearing. But I stayed silent. I looked at Jamal, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his father that I was a woman of taste. But Jamal just adjusted his tie and looked at the floor. That was the second red flag. Dinner was served in the grand hall. The table was set for 26 people. I expected to sit next to Jamal, but the place cards had other ideas. Jamal was seated at the right hand of his father, next to a woman I did not know. I was placed at the very far end of the table, practically in the kitchen, next to a deaf elderly aunt who fell asleep before the appetizers arrived. Directly across from me sat Chloe. Chloe was Jamal's sister-in-law, married to his younger brother. She was blonde, beautiful, and radiated the kind of hostility that is only found in people who are deeply insecure. Chloe leaned forward, her blue eyes sparkling with malice. So, Simone Jamal tells us you are a consultant. That is such a fascinating term. In my experience, that usually means unemployed. Is that why you are wearing that dress? I think I saw that on the clearance rack at Ross last week. It is brave of you to wear synthetic blends to a black tie event. I admire your confidence, really. I took a sip of water, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. Actually, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice steady, this dress is vintage Valentino, and I work in due diligence for venture capital firms. I help companies avoid bankruptcy. Chloe laughed, a high-pitched sound that drew the attention of the entire table. Due diligence, she repeated, mocking my tone. Oh, honey, the only thing you are diligent about is trying to marry up. We all know why you are here. You saw the St. James name and you saw dollar signs. But let me give you a little advice from one woman to another. You do not fit in here. You are like a paper plate in a cabinet of fine china. That was when Winston tapped his spoon against his crystal glass, silencing the room. He stood up, his face flushed with anger, and perhaps too much scotch. He looked down the long table directly at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any human warmth. Stop pretending, Chloe, he boomed. We all know what she is. I had my private investigators run a background check on you, Simone. Or should I say Simone from the South Side. No father. Mother was a seamstress. You went to state school on financial aid. You have lived in rented apartments your whole life. And now you think you can sit at my table and drink my wine and seduce my son. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Winston reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. He did not count it. He just grabbed a handful of $50 bills. Jamal needs a wife who brings assets to this family, not liabilities, he shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He is marrying the governor's daughter next spring. That is a merger. You are a mistake. He threw the money. I watched in slow motion as the bills fluttered through the air. Some landed on the pristine white tablecloth, some landed on the floor, and one landed right in my soup, splashing me. Take that for cab fare and get out, Winston sneered. Go back to the gutter where you belong. You are nothing but street garbage. For a moment, I could not breathe. The humiliation was physical, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I looked at Jamal one last time. He was staring at his plate, refusing to witness my execution. He was a coward. And in that moment, my love for him died, instantly replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I did not wipe the soup off my face immediately. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to remember this image. I slowly pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the marble floor. I stood up to my full height. I did not reach for the money. I did not cry. I picked up the $50 bill from my bowl, shook the liquid off it, and dropped it onto the floor. I checked my watch. It was 8:15 in the evening. Winston, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, carrying across the silent room. You talk a lot about assets and liabilities, but you forgot the most important rule of business. Never insult the auditor. I turned around and walked toward the door, my heels clicking rhythmically like the ticking of a clock counting down. As I reached the archway, I paused and looked back at the table of frozen faces. You just made a $1 billion mistake, I whispered, and unlike you, I always keep my receipts. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the St. James dynasty to rot in their own arrogance. The war had begun. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, but it could not block out the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. The night air in Atlanta was humid and thick, sticking to my skin like a second layer of shame. I marched toward my Honda Civic, which looked pathetically small, parked next to the fleet of luxury SUVs and sports cars that belonged to the St. James family. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys on the gravel driveway. As I bent down to pick them up, I heard the front door open again. For a split second, a foolish, hopeful part of my heart leaped. I thought maybe Jamal had stood up. I thought maybe he had told his father that he loved me and that he was coming with me. I stood up and turned around, expecting to see a hero. Instead, I saw a coward. Jamal was jogging toward me, but his body language was all wrong. He was not rushing to comfort me. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who had just been inconvenienced, not a man whose girlfriend had just been verbally assaulted by his father. He stopped a few feet away from me, loosening his silk tie, as if the very air around us was choking him. "Simone, wait," he huffed out of breath. "You cannot just leave like that. Do you have any idea what you just did in there?" I stared at him, blinking back the hot tears that were threatening to spill. What I did. "Jamal, your father just called me street garbage. He threw money at me like I was some cheap entertainment. And you sat there. You sat there and ate your soup." Jamal ran a hand over his face, exasperated. "He is under a lot of pressure, Simone. The merger with the Atlas Fund is stalling, and he is stressed. You know how he gets when he drinks scotch? You should have just taken the high road. You should have laughed it off. But no, you had to make a scene with that comment about receipts. You embarrassed me in front of the governor's chief of staff." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the icy realization that the man I had spent 6 months with was a stranger. "I embarrassed you," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He humiliated me, Jamal. He treated me like I was less than human. And you are worried about your reputation." Jamal took a step closer, invading my personal space. His eyes were frantic. "Look, you do not understand how this works. The St. James name is everything. Without it, I am nothing. Dad threatened to cut me off this morning. He said if I did not secure this marriage with the governor's daughter, he would cancel my black card and freeze my trust fund." The truth finally spilled out like garbage from a tipped can. I looked at him with pure disgust. "So that is what this is about. Your credit card limit. You were never going to introduce me as your serious girlfriend, were you? I was just a rebellion. A way to make Daddy mad until you had to fall back in line." Jamal scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Grow up, Simone. We had fun, okay? You are great. But be realistic. You rent a one-bedroom apartment in Midtown. My monthly car insurance costs more than your rent. I need this lifestyle. I have debts, Simone. Gambling debts that you do not know about. If I do not marry into political power and get my access to the family accounts restored, I am dead in the water. I cannot live on a consultant's salary." He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip painful and desperate. "Now you are going to turn around. You are going to walk back into that dining room, and you are going to apologize to my father. You will tell him you were emotional and that you know your place. If you do that, maybe he will let me keep seeing you on the side." The suggestion hung in the air, gross and insulting. He wanted me to be his mistress while he married for money. He wanted me to bow down to the man who spat on me just so he could keep his luxury car. I yanked my arm back, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me, Jamal," I warned him. "No," he shouted, his face twisting into something ugly. "You are not ruining this for me. You are going to fix this. Give me your keys. You are not leaving until you apologize." He lunged for my other hand, trying to snatch the car keys from my fingers. At that moment, he was not the charming man who had taken me to jazz clubs. He was just another entitled man who thought he could use force to get his way. But Jamal made a critical mistake. He judged me by my dress and my silence. He forgot that a woman who walks alone in the city learns how to protect herself. As his hand closed over the keys, instinct took over. I did not panic. I stepped into his space, not away from it. I grabbed his wrist with my free hand, finding the pressure point just below the thumb. With a sharp exhale, I twisted his arm behind his back, leveraging his own momentum against him. Jamal yelped in pain, and his knees buckled. I drove him down toward the gravel until he was kneeling in the dirt at my feet. The expensive fabric of his suit pants tore against the stones. "Ow, Simone, stop, you are breaking my arm," he shrieked. I leaned down close to his ear. My voice was steady, devoid of any fear. I am not the one who is broken, Jamal. You are a weak, pathetic little man. You think money makes you powerful. But without your father's checkbook, you are nothing. Do not ever touch me again. I released him and shoved him forward. He sprawled onto the driveway, coughing and clutching his wrist. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes as if seeing me for the first time. "You are crazy," he sputtered. "No, Jamal," I said, opening my car door. "I am just out of your league." I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately. Jamal scrambled to his feet, banging on the window, shouting something I could not hear, but I did not look back. I started the engine and reversed out of the driveway, my headlights sweeping over him one last time, leaving him in the dust where he belonged. As I turned onto the main road leading away from the Buckhead estate, the tears finally stopped. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a burning, white-hot anger. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. It was a secure line, one that bypassed the standard networks. I dialed a number I had not used in months. It rang once. "Yes, Miss Williams," a professional voice answered. I stared at the road ahead, my eyes narrowing as the skyline of Atlanta came into view. "It is Simone," I said. "Wake up the legal team. I want you to activate the St. James file." There was a brief pause on the other end. "The St. James file, ma'am. That is the scorched earth protocol. Are you sure?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I want a full forensic audit of their holdings starting Monday morning. I want to know where every single cent has gone for the last 10 years. And call the Atlas Fund board members. Tell them I am exercising my veto power on the merger. Understood, Miss Williams? Anything else?" "Yes," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "Cancel the catering for their victory party. They are not going to have anything to celebrate." I hung up the phone and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. Winston St. James had called me garbage. He had no idea that he had just handed the keys to his destruction to the only person who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. Monday was going to be a bloodbath. The Monday morning sun streamed through the scratched window of the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop in Midtown that smelled of roasted beans and old books. To the rest of the world, I looked like just another freelancer, nursing a $5 latte and typing away on a laptop. I was wearing a simple gray hoodie and leggings, blending in perfectly with the college students and tired nurses around me. But what was on my screen was far from homework. I was logged into the Atlas Fund secure server, staring at the preliminary forensic audit of the St. James Construction Group. The numbers were bleeding red. It was worse than I thought. The company was not just struggling, it was being hollowed out from the inside. I took a sip of my black coffee, letting the bitterness wake me up. I had not slept since Saturday night, since the moment Winston St. James threw $50 at me. My anger had not faded, it had crystallized into a cold, hard determination. I was tracing a series of suspicious vendor payments when the scent of Chanel No. 5 hit me like a chemical weapon. It was out of place here among the smell of espresso and rain. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The click of designer stilettos on the worn linoleum floor was a dead giveaway. "Well, this is quaint." The voice was high-pitched and laced with fake sweetness. I slowly lifted my eyes from my screen. Standing there looking like she had just stepped out of a Vogue photo shoot was Chloe. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than the rent of this entire building. She looked around the coffee shop with a wrinkled nose, as if she expected to catch a disease just by breathing the air. "Hello, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice flat. "To what do I owe the displeasure?" Chloe pulled out the chair opposite me without asking. She placed her pristine Birkin bag on the sticky table and sighed dramatically. She took off her oversized sunglasses, revealing eyes that were perfectly made up, but completely cold. "Look, Simone, I am not here to fight," she said, leaning in as if we were old friends sharing a secret. I actually felt bad about Saturday night. Winston can be so old-fashioned. He is from a different generation, you know. He does not understand that things are different now. I closed my laptop lid, slightly shielding the evidence of her family's financial ruin. Is that right? I asked. So calling me street garbage is just him being old-fashioned. Interesting interpretation of racism and classism, Chloe. Chloe waved her hand dismissively, her diamond bracelets jingling. Oh, do not be so dramatic, he was drunk. And honestly, you did provoke him with that attitude. But that is not why I am here. I am here because I am a woman who supports other women. I know how hard it must be for someone like you to walk away from a family like ours. The access, the connections. It is a lot to lose. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, white envelope. She slid it across the table toward me. It was heavy. I know things are probably tight for you, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Jamal told me you are just a consultant. We both know that means you live paycheck to paycheck. And after Saturday, I assume Jamal has cut you off, so I wanted to help. I stared at the envelope. I did not touch it. What is this, Chloe? Call it a severance package. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. There is $10,000 in there in cash. Untraceable. I figured you could use it, to get back on your feet, maybe move to a different city, or at least buy some clothes that are not made of polyester. I know your people have a lot of pride, but let us be realistic, Simone. You need this. My people. The phrase hung in the air between us, charged with the kind of casual bigotry that people like Chloe excelled at. She did not think she was being racist. She thought she was being benevolent. She saw herself as the white savior, throwing crumbs to the poor charity case. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the expensive makeup and the smug expression, I saw something else. I saw fear. She was not here out of kindness. She was here to make me go away. She wanted to erase the mistake Jamal had made so she could go back to being the queen bee of the St. James Empire. I reached out and placed my hand on the envelope. Chloe's smile widened, thinking she had won. Thinking that everyone had a price and mine was a measly $10,000. You think this is a lot of money? I asked quietly. For someone in your position, it is life-changing, she replied condescendingly. Do not let your ego get in the way of a hot meal, sweetie. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, loud enough that the barista looked over at us. I slid the envelope back across the table with enough force that it hit her chest. Chloe, I make $10,000 before I finish my morning coffee, I said, my voice hardening. I do not need your charity, and I definitely do not need your husband's stolen money. Chloe froze. Her perfect mask cracked for a fraction of a second. What did you say? I leaned forward, invading her personal space. You heard me. You think I do not know? I know your husband Darius has not landed a legitimate contract in 2 years. I know you guys are living on credit cards and refinancing the lake house, so take this envelope and keep it. You are going to need it to buy anti-wrinkle cream because stress ages you terribly. And trust me, you are about to be under a lot of stress. Chloe stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. You are delusional, she hissed, losing all pretense of kindness. You are just a jealous, bitter little nobody. Jamal was right. You are trash. And when Winston is done with you, you will not be able to get a job sweeping floors in this town. Your husband is going to be unemployed long before I am, Chloe, I countered calmly. In fact, I would start looking for a good criminal defense lawyer if I were you. Chloe grabbed her purse, her hands shaking with rage. You are insane. Stay away from my family. Stay away from Jamal, or I swear to God I will ruin you. She turned to storm out, but in her haste, her elbow knocked her phone off the table. It clattered onto the floor, landing screen side up right next to my foot. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message. I looked down and the words burned themselves into my memory in less than a second. The message was from a contact named Darius Hubby. It read, "Transfer complete, $500K to the Cayman account. Dad does not suspect a thing. Just act normal." Time seemed to slow down. That was it. That was the smoking gun. Winston St. James was not just a bully, he was a victim of his own family's greed. His son and daughter-in-law were embezzling from the company, draining it dry, while he blamed the market. Chloe scrambled to pick up the phone, her fingernails scratching the floor. She snatched it up and looked at me, panic flooding her eyes. She knew I had seen it. She knew she had just made a fatal error. "What did you see?" she demanded, her voice shrill. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow, deliberate sip. I saw enough, Chloe. I saw exactly enough. She stood there for a moment, paralyzed by terror, breathing hard. Then she turned and ran out of the coffee shop, almost tripping over her own heels. I watched her go through the window. She was frantically dialing a number, probably warning Darius. But it was too late. I opened my laptop again. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I did not need to guess anymore. I knew exactly where to look. I typed in the search command for offshore transfers, specifically filtering for the Cayman Islands. A few seconds later, the screen populated with a list of transactions. Hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned out of the St. James operating budget into a shell company controlled by Darius and Chloe Miller. I sat back in my chair and felt a cold smile form on my lips. They had tried to buy my silence with $10,000. Instead, they had just given me the weapon I needed to bury them. I picked up my phone and dialed the head of the forensic accounting team. "It is Simone," I said, my eyes never leaving the screen. "Forget the audit of the construction costs. I want you to focus entirely on the family accounts, specifically Darius and Chloe. I found the leak." I hung up and looked at the empty chair where Chloe had sat. The perfume still lingered, a sickly sweet reminder of the rot beneath the surface. Winston St. James had called me street garbage, but it turned out the real trash was sitting at his own dinner table, and I was about to take it out. The Tuesday evening rain in Atlanta was not a gentle drizzle. It was a torrential downpour that turned the streets into rivers and made the neon lights of the city blur into streaks of red and gold. I drove my Honda Civic slowly through the storm, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. I was exhausted. After spending 12 hours analyzing the St. James financial records, I just wanted to go home to my small apartment, take a hot shower, and sleep. But as I turned the corner onto my street, my heart stopped cold in my chest. My apartment building was a modest brick structure in Midtown. Nothing fancy, but it was safe, and it was mine. Or at least it had been. Standing on the sidewalk in the pouring rain were 3 large cardboard boxes. They were soggy and starting to collapse under the weight of the water. Beside them lay a pile of clothes, a familiar blue sweater soaking in a muddy puddle, and a stack of books with their pages fluttering in the wind. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car, not caring about the rain soaking my hair and clothes instantly. I ran to the curb. It was my life scattered on the concrete like trash. My college diploma was in a broken frame face down in the dirt. The quilt my grandmother stitched for me was heavy with water, ruined beyond repair. Mr. Henderson, my landlord, was standing under the awning of the building entrance. He was a kind older man who had always fixed my leaky faucets and asked about my day. But tonight he would not look me in the eye. He was wringing his hands together, looking terrified. "I am so sorry, Simone," he stammered, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "I did not want to do this. You have been a perfect tenant." But they gave me no choice. I stared at him, water dripping from my eyelashes. "Who gave you no choice, Mr. Henderson? It is illegal to evict someone without notice, especially at night in a storm." He looked around nervously, as if he expected to be watched. "A man came here today, a lawyer from St. James Holdings. He told me that if you were not out by sunset, he would have the city inspectors shut down my entire building. He said he would find code violations that would bankrupt me. He said he would sue me until I lost my home too." I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost dried the rain on my skin. Winston St. James. He was not satisfied with humiliating me at dinner. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to show me that he could reach into my life and crush it whenever he pleased. He was trying to break my spirit to make me desperate enough to come crawling back for that $10,000 Chloe had offered. I have grandchildren, Simone, Mr. Henderson said, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I could not risk it. Please forgive me. I looked at the old man. I could see the fear in his eyes. Winston was a predator, and Mr. Henderson was just prey. I could not blame him for being afraid of a monster. It is okay, Mr. Henderson, I said quietly. I understand. You do not have to worry. I will not cause you any trouble. I did not try to save everything. The cheap furniture, the kitchenware, the things that defined my life as a struggle, I left them there. I grabbed the waterproof case containing my laptop and my hard drives. I grabbed the few clothes that were still dry inside the plastic bins. I threw them into the trunk of my car. I stood there for one last moment looking at the ruins of my modest life. Winston thought he was making me homeless. He thought he was sending me to a shelter. He had no idea that he was actually setting me free. I got back into my car and locked the doors. The interior felt cold and damp, but my mind was crystal clear. I drove away from the apartment complex, leaving the past in the rearview mirror. I did not head toward the motels on the outskirts of town. I turned the wheel toward the heart of Buckhead, the same neighborhood where the St. James family lived in their ivory tower. I drove straight to the Four Seasons Hotel. The valet looked skeptical as I pulled my battered Honda up to the gleaming entrance. I stepped out looking like a drowned rat, my hair plastered to my skull, my clothes clinging to me. He started to step forward, probably to tell me that deliveries were around the back just like Vivian had done. But before he could speak, the glass doors slid open and the general manager, Marcus, stepped out. He was a man who memorized the faces of his most important guests, and he recognized me instantly, despite the lack of designer clothes. Ms. Williams, Marcus said, ignoring the rain and rushing to hold an umbrella over my head. Good evening. We were not expecting you, but we are always honored by your presence. The valet's jaw dropped. I handed him my keys. Keep it close, I said, and please dry the seats. Marcus escorted me through the lobby. The golden light, the smell of fresh lilies, and the soft piano music were a stark contrast to the cold street I had just left. People turned to stare at the wet woman walking with the manager, but I did not care. I walked with my head high. I need a room for the indefinite future, Marcus, I said as we reached the private elevator. Of course, Ms. Williams, Marcus replied, pressing his thumb against the biometric scanner. The owner's penthouse is unoccupied. We keep it reserved for shareholders like yourself. I will have housekeeping bring up some dry clothes from the boutique immediately. And I assume you would like a bottle of the 1982 Margot. Make it 2 bottles, I said, as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the world. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the center of a 3,000-square-foot penthouse that overlooked the entire city of Atlanta. The storm was still raging outside, but up here it was just a beautiful light show. I was wrapped in a plush white robe, holding a glass of wine that cost more than my monthly rent at the old apartment. Winston St. James thought he had thrown me onto the street. He did not know that I owned the street. I sat down on the velvet sofa and opened my phone. I had missed several calls from unknown numbers. There was a new email in my inbox marked urgent. It was from the legal firm representing the St. James family. The subject line read, "Notice of civil action regarding romantic fraud." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I opened the email. It was a cease and desist letter combined with a demand for the return of assets. It accused me of misrepresenting my financial status to solicit gifts and hospitality from Jamal St. James. It listed the items they wanted returned. A bracelet from Tiffany's that was silver, not gold. A designer handbag that I knew was a knockoff Jamal bought in Chinatown, and they wanted reimbursement for all the dinners we had eaten together. The letter ended with a threat. If these assets are not returned within 24 hours, and if you do not sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the private matters of the St. James family, we will proceed with a lawsuit for fraud and emotional distress. Winston was trying to bully me with the law. He thought I was a poor girl who would be terrified of a court battle. He thought I could not afford a lawyer. He thought this letter would make me disappear. I took a sip of the wine, savoring the complex notes of dark cherry and oak. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there in his mansion, Winston was probably celebrating, thinking he had won, thinking he had crushed the bug that dared to crawl onto his dinner table. I typed a reply to the lawyer. I did not use legal jargon. I did not threaten. I wrote 2 simple sentences. I received your list of cheap trinkets, and I will return them in person at the gala on Friday. But make sure your client brings his checkbook because I am going to cash in a debt that he cannot afford to pay. I hit send and threw the phone onto the cushion. You want to play the law, Winston, I whispered to the empty room. Let us play. But you should know that in this game I am not the defendant. I am the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And the sentence is going to be total annihilation. The glass walls of my corner office on the 45th floor of the Atlas Fund building offered a panoramic view of Atlanta sleeping beneath a blanket of rain. It was 3 in the morning. Most people in my position would be asleep, especially after being evicted and humiliated. But adrenaline is a powerful stimulant. I sat in my ergonomic chair surrounded by 3 high-definition monitors glowing with the lifeblood of the St. James Empire. To the outside world, I was Simone, the struggling consultant who drove a Honda Civic. But in this room, I was the director of due diligence for the largest venture capital firm in the Southeast. And I was about to dissect Winston St. James like a frog in a biology class. I took a sip of cold water and cracked my knuckles before typing in my security clearance code. The screen flashed green, granting me access to the deepest levels of the St. James Financial Archives. Winston had applied for a $200 million emergency liquidity injection from Atlas. On the surface, his application looked pristine. The glossy brochures showed booming construction sites and projected profits that would make any investor salivate. But I knew better. I knew that men like Winston often spent more money polishing the exterior of their ships than fixing the holes in the hull. I started with the vendor list. In construction, money usually disappears through materials and labor. I ran a cross-reference algorithm searching for duplicate addresses and recurring payments under $10,000, which is the threshold for automatic banking alerts. The system hummed for a moment, processing terabytes of data before pinging with a red alert. There it was. A company called Apex Supply Solutions, based in a warehouse district in Savannah. Over the last 3 years, St. James Construction had paid Apex Supply over $4 million for high-grade lumber and steel beams. It seemed legitimate on paper. But when I pulled up the shipping manifests, I noticed something strange. The weight of the shipments was listed as 0. Millions of dollars of steel that weighed nothing. I dug deeper. I traced the ownership of Apex Supply Solutions. It was hidden behind a series of LLCs registered in Delaware meant to obscure the true beneficiary. But I had software designed to pierce the corporate veil. Layer by layer, I peeled back the deception. The registered agent for the company was a lawyer I recognized. He was the same man who had handled the prenuptial agreement for Jamal's younger brother Darius. And the primary signatory on the bank account for Apex Supply was not a lumber tycoon. It was C. Miller, Chloe Miller. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the audacity of it. Chloe, the woman who had sneered at my dress and offered me $10,000 of pity money, was running a massive embezzlement scheme right under Winston's nose. She and her husband Darius were not just living beyond their means, they were actively cannibalizing the family business. They had set up fake vendor accounts invoicing the company for materials that never existed and funneling the cash into their private accounts to fund their vacations, designer bags, and that brand new Porsche Darius was driving. The irony was suffocating. Winston St. James prided himself on his intuition. He claimed he could smell a bad deal a mile away. He had looked at me, a woman who had worked her way up from nothing, and saw a thief. Yet he looked at Chloe, a woman with the right skin color and the right pedigree, and saw perfection. He was so blinded by his own prejudice that he never thought to check the pockets of the people sitting at his own dinner table. He trusted her because she looked the part. He despised me because I did not. That racism was not just a character flaw, it was a business liability that was costing him millions. I continued to follow the money. It did not stop at Apex Supply. There were consulting fees paid to non-existent firms in the Cayman Islands. There were landscape maintenance charges for properties that St. James Construction had sold 5 years ago. Darius and Chloe were not just skimming off the top, they were drilling holes in the bottom of the boat. The St. James Empire was not a fortress, it was a hollow shell held together by debt and lies. If Atlas Fund gave them that $200 million, it would disappear into Chloe's offshore accounts within a month, leaving us with nothing but bad debt. My office phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Jonathan, the CEO of Atlas Fund, and my direct superior. He rarely called this early unless the building was on fire. I picked up the handset. "Good morning, Jonathan." "Simone." "I apologize for the hour," Jonathan said, his voice tight with stress. "But we have a situation in the lobby." I frowned, checking the security feed on my second monitor. "In the lobby. It is 3:30 in the morning." "I know," Jonathan sighed. "It is Winston St. James. He is down there with his lawyers. He is practically hysterical, Simone. He says the bank is threatening to freeze his payroll accounts by Friday. He is demanding to see someone senior. He says he will not leave until he gets a signature on the loan term sheet. He is making a scene, screaming about his friendship with the governor." A cold smile spread across my face. Desperation did not look good on Winston. He was realizing that his house of cards was shaking, and he was terrified. He needed this money not for expansion but for survival. He needed it to cover the holes Chloe and Darius had dug before the auditors found them. "Tell him to go home, Jonathan," I said, calmly leaning back in my leather chair. "Tell him that Atlas Fund does not conduct business with desperate men in hotel lobbies in the middle of the night. But Simone, he is threatening to take the deal to our competitors," Jonathan warned. "If we lose this account, we will not lose it." I interrupted, my voice sharp with authority. "Because there is no deal, Jonathan. The company is toxic. I am looking at their books right now, and they are insolvent. If we sign that check, we might as well set the money on fire." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Jonathan spoke again, his tone shifting from anxious to respectful. "You found something, didn't you?" "I found everything," I confirmed. "But we are not going to reject him over the phone. That would be too easy. We need to do this publicly. We need to make an example of what happens when you try to defraud Atlas Fund." "So what is the play?" Jonathan asked. "Tell Winston that the board has reviewed his application," I said, spinning a pen between my fingers. "Tell him that we are very interested, but we have a few final questions regarding compliance. Tell him we will sign the papers at the gala on Friday night, in front of the press, in front of the governor, in front of everyone he tried to impress." "You want to do it at the gala?" Jonathan asked, hesitation creeping into his voice. "That is brutal, Simone. That is his turf." "Exactly," I replied, standing up and walking to the window, looking down at the city that Winston thought he owned. "He loves an audience, Jonathan. He loves to show off his power. So let us give him the biggest audience of his life. Tell him the director of due diligence will meet him there personally to finalize the transaction. Do not tell him my name," I added quickly. "Just tell him that the person holding the checkbook is coming to save him." "Understood, Simone," Jonathan said. "I will send him home. I will set the meeting for Friday at 8. I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I looked tired, but my eyes were burning with a fire that would not be extinguished. Winston St. James was going to spend the next 3 days thinking he had won. He would tell his friends. He would probably buy another bottle of scotch to celebrate. He would smirk at Jamal and tell him that this was why they needed to keep people like me away from their family. He had no idea that he was walking into a slaughter. He was coming to the gala expecting a lifeline. Instead, he was going to find a noose, and I would be the one to kick the chair out from under him. Friday could not come fast enough. The Wednesday afternoon sun reflected off the polished marble floors of Maison de l'Amour, the most exclusive fashion boutique in Atlanta. The air inside smelled of white orchids and expensive leather. It was a place where price tags did not exist, because if you had to ask, you clearly could not afford it. I was not there to browse. I was there to find armor. For the gala on Friday night, I needed a dress that would not just turn heads but would stop hearts. I needed something that screamed power, something that would make Winston St. James regret every breath he took. I walked through the racks of silk and chiffon, my fingers trailing over fabrics that cost more than a year of college tuition. In my old life, the Simone who drove a Honda and lived in a rented apartment would have been terrified to even step inside this store. I would have worried about the sales clerks judging my shoes or following me around to make sure I did not steal anything. But today, I walked with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was. I was Simone Williams, the director of due diligence for the Atlas Fund, and in 48 hours, I was going to own this town. I stopped in front of a mannequin displaying a gown that took my breath away. It was crimson red, a deep blood color that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. It was structured, yet flowing, dangerous, yet elegant. It was the color of war. I reached out to touch the fabric, visualizing how it would look when I walked into the ballroom to deliver the death blow to the St. James Empire. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by a shrill voice that made my skin crawl. "Oh my God, Mom, look at this one! It is perfect for Vanessa. It screams governor's daughter." My hand froze on the red silk. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The high-pitched nasal tone belonged to Chloe, and the heavy footsteps following her could only be Vivian. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. Of all the boutiques in Atlanta, they had walked into this one. I considered leaving. I considered slipping out the back to avoid a scene. But then I remembered the rain. I remembered my belongings thrown on the sidewalk. I remembered the name calling. I was done running. I stayed where I was, my back to them, my hand still resting on the dress. "I do not know, Chloe." Vivian's voice boomed, echoing off the walls. "Vanessa needs something white or cream. She needs to look pure. Jamal needs a bride who looks like an angel, not a temptress. We need to remind everyone that the St. James family stands for traditional values." I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. Traditional values, like embezzlement and fraud. I turned around slowly just as Chloe spotted me. Her eyes went wide and her mouth dropped open. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Mom," she gasped, grabbing Vivian's arm. "Look." Vivian turned, her face contorting into a mask of pure disgust the moment she saw me. She marched over her heels, clicking aggressively on the floor. "You," Vivian spat. "Are you following us? I knew you were obsessed with my son, but this is pathetic. Stalking us while we shop for his wedding dress. Do you have no shame?" I looked at her calmly. I did not flinch. "Hello, Vivian. Hello, Chloe. I am not following you. I am shopping, just like you." Vivian let out a sharp, cruel laugh that drew the attention of the two sales associates standing near the counter. "Shopping," she mocked. "In here. Simone, look around you. This is Maison de l'Amour. They do not sell second-hand clothes here. They do not accept food stamps. You are embarrassing yourself. Get out before I have security throw you out." She reached out and tried to slap my hand away from the red dress. "And take your dirty hands off that gown," she snapped. "That is silk. You will stain it." I did not move my hand. I gripped the fabric tighter, staring her down. "I am not leaving, Vivian," I said, my voice low and steady. "And I suggest you lower your voice. You are disturbing the peace." Chloe stepped forward, emboldened by her mother-in-law's aggression. "Who do you think you are talking to?" Chloe hissed. "We are the St. James family. We are VIPs in this city. You are just a piece of trash my husband's brother forgot to take out. If you do not leave right now, I am calling the police. I will tell them you are harassing us. I will tell them you threatened me. Do it!" I challenged them. "Call the police. I would love for them to see the footage of you assaulting a customer. Vivian's face turned a deep shade of purple. She was not used to being defied. She turned to the sales associates, snapping her fingers at them, as if they were dogs. You there, manager. Get over here right now. A tall, elegant man in a sharp black suit emerged from the back office. It was Julian, the boutique manager. He was a man of impeccable taste and even higher standards. He adjusted his glasses and walked toward us, his expression unreadable. Vivian smiled triumphantly, crossing her arms over her chest. Finally, she said, "Sir, I am Vivian St. James. My family spends a fortune in this city. This person here, this woman is bothering us. She is a stalker, and she clearly cannot afford to be in your establishment. She is touching the merchandise with her filthy hands. I demand that you escort her out immediately, or I will make sure none of my friends ever shop here again." Chloe nodded vigorously, playing the victim. "She threatened me. She lied. She is dangerous. Please remove her." Julian stopped in front of us. He looked at Vivian, then at Chloe, and finally his gaze landed on me. The silence stretched out for 5 agonizing seconds. Vivian was tapping her foot, waiting for him to grab my arm and drag me to the curb. Instead, Julian turned his back on them completely. He bowed his head slightly toward me, a gesture of deep respect. "Ms. Williams," Julian said, his voice warm and welcoming. "I apologize for the delay. I was just in the back confirming the arrival of the shipment you requested." Vivian's jaw dropped. Chloe made a choking sound. "Ms. Williams," Vivian stammered, confused. "Wait, do you know who she is?" "She is a nobody. She is my son's ex-girlfriend who lives in a rental." Julian raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. He did not even look at her. His focus remained entirely on me. "Ms. Williams, we have just received the exclusive Paris runway collection. The designer sent it over specifically for you, knowing you would be attending the gala this Friday. We have prepared the private VIP suite for you with champagne and truffles. No one will disturb you there." He gestured toward the velvet-roped area at the back of the store, an area that Vivian and Chloe had clearly never been invited into. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, seeing the blood drain from their faces. "Thank you, Julian," I said smoothly. "That sounds perfect. It is a bit too loud out here for my taste. The riffraff seems to be getting bold today." I released the red dress and smoothed down my jacket. I stepped closer to Vivian, who was now standing frozen like a statue, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You know, Vivian," I whispered, leaning in so only she could hear. "You were right about one thing. Jamal does need a bride who represents the family values. It is a shame that by Monday morning those values will be worth less than the gum on the bottom of my shoe." I turned to Chloe, who was clutching her purse so hard her knuckles were white. "And Chloe," I said, my eyes cold, "that cream dress you liked, you should buy it. It will look great for your mugshot. White really makes the handcuffs pop." I turned on my heel and followed Julian toward the VIP suite. "Wait!" Vivian screeched behind me, her voice cracking. "Who is she? Why are you treating her like royalty? Do you know how much money my husband has?" I heard Julian pause and address them one last time, his voice dripping with professional disdain. "Madam Ms. Williams is not just a customer. She is one of our top-tier shareholders. Now, if you cannot lower your voices, I will have to ask you to leave. We have a strict policy against harassment." I walked through the velvet curtains and sat down on the plush sofa in the private suite. A server immediately poured me a glass of golden champagne. I could still hear the faint sounds of Vivian and Chloe arguing with the staff outside, but they sounded small, distant, and irrelevant. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like victory. I looked at the rack of dresses Julian had prepared for me. They were exquisite, but my mind was not on the clothes. It was on the look in Vivian's eyes. That look of total confusion and fear. She was starting to realize that the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She just did not know that I was the earthquake, and the big tremor was still to come. The heavy velvet curtains of the VIP suite swooshed shut behind me instantly, cutting off the shrill noise of Vivian and Chloe outside. The silence in the private dressing room was heavy and luxurious, smelling of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. I stood alone in front of a three-way mirror that stretched from the floor to the gilded ceiling. My reflection stared back at me. For a moment I saw the girl who had been humiliated at the dinner table, the girl in the clearance rack dress. But then I looked at the garment hanging on the gold rack beside me, and I knew that girl was gone forever. The dress was a masterpiece of crimson silk. It was not just red, it was the color of fresh blood. It was the color of a warning sign. It was the color of revenge. I ran my fingers over the cool fabric, feeling the weight of the craftsmanship. Julian, the manager, had not lied. This was from the Paris Runway collection, a one-of-a-kind piece designed for a woman who commanded rooms, not for a woman who served in them. I slipped out of my street clothes and stepped into the gown. It fit as if the designer had my measurements memorized. The silk hugged my curves like a second skin, plunging daringly in the back, but remaining elegant and structured in the front. I zipped it up and turned to the mirror. The transformation was absolute. I did not look like a consultant. I did not look like a victim. I looked like the CEO of a company that was about to acquire the world. I looked dangerous. As I adjusted the straps, I heard voices drifting through the curtain. Vivian and Chloe were still out there, refusing to leave, unable to accept that I had been granted access to a sanctuary they were denied. "She is probably sleeping with him." Chloe's voice leaked through the velvet, dripping with jealousy. "That is the only explanation, Mom. Look at her. She cannot afford a button in this store. She probably seduced the manager to get a few minutes of feeling special. It is sad, really." I paused, my hand resting on the cool glass of the champagne flute. Their pettiness was almost impressive. They could not conceive of a world where a woman like me could have power on her own merit. In their minds, my value had to be tied to a man either through marriage or through sex. Vivian huffed loud enough for me to hear. "You are right, darling. It is the only logical answer. Julian always did have low standards. We should report him to corporate. Allowing street trash into the VIP suite devalues the brand. I feel dirty just being in the same building as her." I took a slow sip of the golden champagne, letting the bubbles fizz against my tongue. I could have stayed in there, hiding in luxury, waiting for them to leave. But that was the old Simone. The new Simone wanted them to see. I wanted them to witness the threat before it consumed them. I set the glass down. I checked my reflection one last time. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes cold. I reached out and swept the velvet curtains open with a dramatic flourish. The sound of their gossiping died instantly. Vivian and Chloe were standing near the accessory counter, pretending to look at scarves, but their eyes snapped to me the moment I emerged. The boutique fell silent. Even the other customers stopped to look. The dress caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, shimmering like liquid fire. I walked toward the main counter, my stride long and confident, the silk train flowing behind me like a river of blood. I did not look at the floor. I looked straight ahead, right at the two women who had tried to break me. Chloe's mouth actually fell open. She dropped the silk scarf she was holding. For a second she forgot to be hateful and just stared in pure envy. The dress was better than anything she had ever worn. It made her look like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Vivian recovered first. Her face twisted into a sneer, but I could see the uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She was trying to reconcile the image of the poor girl she had evicted with the vision of power standing before her. "Well," she said, her voice shrill and shaky, "I hope you enjoyed playing Princess Simone. But playtime is over. Do you have any idea how much that costs? You are going to soil it, and then you will be in debt for the rest of your miserable life trying to pay for it." I ignored her. I walked straight to the counter where Julian was waiting with a smile. "It is perfect, Julian," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent store. "I will take it, and I will take the diamond earrings in the display case, the ones with the ruby accents. They match the neckline perfectly." Chloe let out a scoff that sounded like a bark. You are delusional. Julian calls security. She is trying to steal. She cannot pay for that. That bill is over $15,000. Julian did not move. He looked at me with expectation. I reached into my purse. I did not pull out cash. I did not pull out a debit card. I reached into the hidden compartment of my wallet and withdrew a card made of heavy, anodized titanium. It was black. Matte black. The Centurion card from American Express. The kind of card you get by invitation only. The kind of card that has no limit. I held it up for a second, letting the light catch the black metal surface. Vivian gasped. She knew what that card was. She had been trying to get Winston to qualify for one for years, but his credit was too leveraged. I dropped the card onto the glass counter. It made a heavy, distinct clink sound that echoed in the quiet room. It was the sound of ultimate power. Put it on this, I said calmly, and have the dress sent to my suite at the Four Seasons. I do not want to carry it. Vivian stumbled forward, gripping the edge of a display table for support. Her face had gone pale beneath her heavy makeup. That is a fake, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. That has to be fake. Where did you get that? Who did you steal that from? I punched in my code. The machine beeped instantly. Approved. I took the receipt and the black card, slipping them back into my purse. I turned slowly to face Vivian and Chloe. They looked small now. They looked cheap. It is not fake, Vivian, I said, stepping into her personal space. And neither is the eviction notice you sent me. You wanted me out of my apartment because you thought I was poor. You thought I was weak. I leaned in closer, smelling the fear radiating off her. You asked where I got the money. Let us just say I am very good at my job. My job is finding things people want to hide, like stolen money, like fake invoices, like hollow companies. Vivian's eyes widened. She took a step back, terrified by the menace in my voice. What are you talking about? She stammered. I smiled, a cold, humorless smile. I am talking about the future, Vivian. You are worried about a wedding dress. You are worried about appearances. But if I were you, I would stop spending money. I would start saving every penny. Why? Chloe asked, her voice trembling. Because I replied, my voice sharp as a knife. The wedding is not going to happen. Jamal is not going to marry the governor's daughter. But do not worry, the family will still have a big event to attend. I paused, letting the tension build to a breaking point. It will be the funeral of St. James Construction. And I will be the one delivering the eulogy. I turned and walked toward the glass doors, the automatic sensors sliding them open for me. I left them standing there in the middle of the expensive boutique, surrounded by clothes they could no longer afford, paralyzed by a threat they did not fully understand. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cool evening air hit my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Jamal. The preview message popped up on the screen. Baby, please answer me. I miss you so much. I hate this. My dad is forcing me to be with Vanessa. She is boring. She is not you. Can we meet tonight? I need to see you. I can get away for an hour. I stared at the screen. He was playing both sides. He wanted his rich wife for the money, and he wanted me for his ego. He thought he could keep me on the side, hidden in the shadows, while he played the dutiful son in public. He thought I was still the girl who would wait for him in the car. I typed a reply, my fingers moving fast. I did not agree to meet him in secret. I did not agree to be his side piece. I was done hiding. I typed, I understand, Jamal. We need to talk. But not tonight. Meet me at the gala on Friday. I will be there. I hit send. I pocketed the phone and hailed a taxi. The trap was set. Jamal thought I was coming to the gala to beg for him back. Winston thought I was gone for good. They were all walking blindly into the fire, and I had the match in my hand. Friday night was going to be explosive. Friday morning dawned over Atlanta with a deceptive brilliance. The sky was a piercing blue, and the air was crisp, perfect weather for a victory lap. Inside the St. James estate, the mood was electric. For the first time in months, the heavy cloud of impending bankruptcy had lifted, replaced by the manic energy of people who believe they have gotten away with murder. Winston St. James sat at the head of the breakfast table, looking like a king who had just conquered a new land. He was wearing his tuxedo shirt already, even though the gala was hours away. He raised a glass of mimosa to his family, his face flushed with triumph. To us, Winston bellowed his voice, rattling the crystal chandelier. To the St. James legacy. They said we were finished. They said the market had turned against us. But look at us now. The Atlas Fund is not just giving us a loan, they are giving us a war chest. $200 million by midnight. He took a long swig of the champagne and slammed the glass down. Vivian clapped her hands delightedly, her eyes sparkling at the thought of the shopping spree she could now justify. Chloe sat next to Darius, looking smug. She believed her secret was safe. She thought that with the influx of new capital, her embezzlement would be buried under a mountain of fresh cash. She did not know that I had already traced every single cent. Winston pointed a sausage-like finger at Chloe. And you, my dear, you have stuck by this family through the lean times. Once the ink is dry on that contract, I am buying you that villa in Tuscany you have been whining about. Consider it a thank you for being a loyal daughter-in-law. Chloe feigned surprise, pressing a hand to her chest. Oh, Winston, you are too generous. I only did what any family member would do. And Jamal Winston continued, turning to his son. I know you have been eyeing that new Aston Martin. Go order it tomorrow. You need a car that fits your station, especially now that you are marrying Vanessa. We need to look the part of American royalty. Jamal smiled, but it was weak. He was the only one at the table who seemed to have a shadow of doubt in his eyes. He was looking at his phone, probably waiting for a text from me that would never come. He was trapped between the allure of the sports car and the terrifying memory of me in the boutique. But greed is a powerful anesthetic, and as Winston listed off the luxuries they would soon enjoy, Jamal simply nodded and drank his juice. He chose the comforting lie over the difficult truth. While they were dividing up money they did not yet have. I was sitting in a conference room 10 miles away, surrounded by a very different kind of atmosphere. The war room at the Atlas Fund was silent except for the hum of hard drives and the rustling of paper. The air was cold-conditioned to protect the servers and keep the minds sharp. Sitting around the long glass table were 5 of the best forensic accountants in the country and 3 senior litigators. They were my army. And we were ready for battle. David, the lead accountant, slid a thick binder across the table toward me. It landed with a heavy thud. It is worse than we thought, Simone, David said, rubbing his tired eyes. We knew about the embezzlement from Chloe and Darius. That is about $4 million. But Winston is the real problem. He has been cooking the books for 5 years. He has inflated the value of his real estate holdings by 300%. He is claiming assets that do not exist. He is claiming to own land that he sold back in 2018. I opened the binder, scanning the columns of numbers. It was a roadmap of fraud. Winston had built a castle on a foundation of sand. He is Ponzi scheming his own company, I murmured. He is using new loans to pay off the interest on old loans. If we give him this money, it will be gone in 6 months. Exactly, David confirmed. But that is not the worst part. Turn to page 42. Look at the collateral documents for the loan application. I flipped the pages until I reached the section marked Security and Guarantees. To secure a loan of $200 million, the bank required significant collateral. Winston had put up the St. James estate and the entire family trust. I looked at the signature line on the deed of trust. There were 2 signatures required to leverage the family estate. One was Winston St. James. The other was the co-trustee. My eyes narrowed as I read the name written in elegant looping cursive. Eleanor St. James. Eleanor, I said, looking up at David. That is Jamal's mother. David nodded solemnly. Correct. And according to the death certificate we pulled from the state registry, Eleanor St. James passed away from ovarian cancer 5 years ago. I looked back at the document. The date next to her signature was from last Tuesday. A chill ran down my spine. This was not just financial fraud. This was moral bankruptcy. Winston St. James needed the loan so badly that he had forged his dead wife's signature to get it. He had used the ghost of the woman who built the empire with him to try and save his own skin. "This changes everything," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Embezzlement is a white-collar crime. People get probation for that. But this is identity theft. This is grand larceny. This is forging legal documents. If we hand this to the district attorney, Winston is not just going to lose his company, he is going to die in federal prison." I ran my finger over the forged signature. I remembered Jamal talking about his mother once. He said she was the only person who ever truly loved him. He said she was the moral compass of the family, and now his father had desecrated her memory for money. I looked up at the team of lawyers. Their faces were grim. They knew what this meant. This was no longer a negotiation. This was an execution. "Pack it up." I ordered, closing the binder. "Make copies of everything. Specifically the death certificate and the loan application. I want them blown up. I want them ready to be projected on a screen." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Ms. Williams, are we going to call the police now? We can have him arrested at his house." "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "If we arrest him now, he will spin it. He will say it was a mistake. He will hire a PR firm to garner sympathy. He will play the victim." I turned back to the room, my eyes blazing. We let him walk into that gala tonight. We let him shake hands with the governor. We let him give his speech about family values and legacy. We let him climb as high as he possibly can. And then when he thinks he is touching the stars, we pull the ground out from under him. I want him to look me in the eye when he realizes it is over. I checked my watch. It was noon. 8 hours until showtime. Winston was probably picking out his cufflinks right now, humming a happy tune. He was probably thinking about how smart he was, how he had outmaneuvered the bank, how he had saved his dynasty. He did not know that the ink on his victory contract was actually the ink of his death warrant. I picked up the file containing the forged signature. "You called me street garbage, Winston," I whispered to the empty air. "But at least I never sold out the people I loved. Tonight, you are going to learn that some things cannot be bought." I walked out of the conference room, leaving the team to finalize the paperwork. I had an appointment at the salon. I had to look my best. After all, it is not every day you get to bury a billion-dollar lie. The calm was over. The storm was coming. And its name was Simone. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Atlanta was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering diamonds. It was the kind of room where the air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the lies being whispered over glasses of champagne. At the center of it all stood Winston St. James. He looked like a king holding court. He was shaking hands, laughing too loudly, and slapping the backs of men he secretly despised. To the outside observer, he was a titan of industry celebrating a massive merger. But I was watching from the shadows of the tinted limousine window, and I could see the truth. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. I saw the way his eyes darted nervously toward the entrance every few seconds, checking his watch. He was terrified. He was waiting for the Atlas Fund delegation to arrive and sign the check that would save his life. Beside him, Vivian was preening like a peacock in a silver gown that was tight enough to cut off her circulation. She was showing off her diamond necklace to the mayor's wife, oblivious to the fact that the necklace was likely bought with stolen company funds. And there was Chloe standing next to Darius, wearing the white cream dress she had bought at the boutique. She looked pale. Every time someone approached her, she flinched as if she expected to be arrested. She knew her time was running out, but she did not know just how little time she had left. And then there was Jamal. My ex-boyfriend looked handsome in his bespoke tuxedo standing next to Vanessa, the governor's daughter. But he looked miserable. He was nursing a drink, staring blankly at the crowd, while Vanessa chatted animatedly on her phone, ignoring him completely. It was a perfect picture of a business arrangement masquerading as a romance. I took a deep breath. The air conditioning in the limousine was cold, but my blood was running hot. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, no shaking, no fear. I touched the ruby earrings I had bought 2 days ago. They felt heavy and cold against my skin. "Driver," I said into the intercom, "you can pull up now." The long black car glided forward, moving like a shark through deep water. It pulled up right to the edge of the red carpet where a wall of paparazzi was waiting. They were bored, snapping listless photos of local socialites. They were waiting for a star. They were waiting for a story. The driver stepped out and walked around to open my door. The heavy thud of the latch release echoed like a gunshot in the night air. I stepped out. First one red heel hit the carpet, then the other. I stood up, letting the crimson silk of the Paris runway gown cascade around me. The dress was a masterpiece of engineering and art. It hugged every curve of my body before flowing out into a dramatic train that looked like a pool of liquid fire. The deep red color stood out violently against the sea of black and white tuxedos. It was a declaration of war. For a second there was silence. Then the flashbulbs exploded. The paparazzi did not know who I was, but they knew power when they saw it. They started shouting, asking for my name, asking who I was wearing. I did not answer. I simply adjusted my sunglasses, even though it was night, and started walking up the red carpet. I walked with the rhythm of a woman who owns the pavement beneath her feet. I saw the moment the St. James family noticed me. It started with a ripple in the crowd. People stopped talking and turned to look. The sea of guests parted not out of politeness, but out of shock. Winston stopped mid-laugh. His glass froze halfway to his mouth. He squinted, trying to recognize the woman in the red dress. Vivian gasped, clutching her pearls in a cliché of horror. But it was Jamal who reacted first. I saw his eyes go wide. I saw the confusion morph into recognition and then into pure, unadulterated panic. He said something to Vanessa, who looked up annoyed, and then he started shoving his way through the crowd toward me. He looked frantic. He looked like a man trying to stop a bomb from detonating. He reached me just as I was about to step into the foyer. He blocked my path, his chest heaving, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Simone," he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "What are you doing here? Are you insane?" I stopped and looked at him over the rim of my sunglasses. I did not smile. I did not frown. I looked at him with the indifference of a statue. "Hello, Jamal," I said calmly. "You look sweaty. You should hydrate." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. This was the second time in a week he had put his hands on me in anger. "Do not play games with me," he snarled, leaning in close so the cameras would not catch his aggression. "You are crashing my father's gala. You are here to make a scene, aren't you? You are here to beg for me back, or try to embarrass me in front of Vanessa. Well, it is not going to work." He looked around nervously, ensuring his father was not watching. "Look at you," he continued, his eyes scanning my dress. "You spent that $10,000 Chloe gave you on a dress, didn't you? You think playing dress-up makes you one of us? It is pathetic. You are still the same girl who cannot pay her rent. You are just street garbage wrapped in red silk. Now turn around and get back in your taxi before I have security drag you out by your hair." I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up at his eyes. "Let go of me, Jamal," I said softly. "This is your last warning." He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Or what?" "You will hurt me. You have no power here, Simone. This is the Ritz. This is my world. Security." He raised his hand and waved frantically at the large man in a black suit standing by the door. "Security over here!" Jamal shouted, drawing the attention of half the lobby. "This woman is a stalker. She is trespassing. Remove her immediately. The security guard started walking toward us. Jamal smirked at me, a look of triumph on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he was about to watch me be humiliated publicly, just like his father had done at the dinner table. I did not move. I stood my ground, waiting. The security guard was a massive man with an earpiece. He marched up to us, his face stern. Jamal pointed at me. "Get her out of here," Jamal ordered. "She is not on the list. She is harassing the guests." The guard stopped. He looked at Jamal. Then he looked at me. He looked at the red dress. He looked at the black titanium invite card I was holding casually in my hand. Then suddenly, a hand reached out and shoved Jamal back hard. It was not the security guard. It was Mr. Sterling, the head of protocol for the event, and the personal liaison for the Atlas Fund. He was a man of immense influence, and he looked furious. "Step aside, Mr. St. James, Mr." Sterling barked, his voice cutting through the noise. Jamal stumbled back, almost losing his balance. He looked at Mr. Sterling in shock. "Excuse me," Jamal stammered. "Do you know who I am? I am Winston's son. This woman is trash. She is crashing the party." Mr. Sterling ignored Jamal completely. He turned to me, and his entire demeanor changed. He bowed slightly, a gesture of deep respect that sent a shockwave through the onlookers. "Ms. Williams," Mr. Sterling said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I apologize profusely for the disruption. The Atlas Fund is honored by your presence tonight. We have been waiting for you." Jamal's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from me to Mr. Sterling, his brain unable to process what was happening. "Wait," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling. "Ms. Williams. What do you mean? She is just Simone. She is a consultant." Mr. Sterling turned on him, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Young man, you will show some respect. This is not just a consultant. This is the director of due diligence and the representative of the board. She is the guest of honor tonight. Without her signature, your father's company does not get a single dime. Now get out of her way before I have you removed for harassing our VIP." The color drained from Jamal's face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stared at me with horror. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he had called garbage, the woman he had discarded, was the one holding the keys to his kingdom. I adjusted my shawl and took a step forward, forcing Jamal to scramble out of my path. I stopped right next to him, close enough to smell the fear on him. "I told you, Jamal." I whispered, my voice ice cold. "I am not here to crash the party. I am here to end it." I walked past him, leaving him shaking in the foyer, and stepped into the ballroom where Winston St. James was waiting for his savior, unaware that his executioner had just arrived. The heavy double doors of the private boardroom clicked shut, sealing us inside a bubble of silence that felt like a vacuum. Outside in the ballroom, the orchestra was playing a waltz, and champagne corks were popping, but inside this room the air was stale and thick with tension. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. The room was dimly lit by a modern crystal chandelier that cast long shadows across the polished granite table. On one side sat the St. James clan. Winston was pacing back and forth, his patent leather shoes squeaking aggressively on the plush carpet. He checked his gold Rolex for the 10th time in a minute. Beside him, Darius and Chloe sat huddled together like frightened children waiting for the principal. Chloe was chewing on her thumbnail, ruining her expensive manicure, her eyes darting toward the door every time a waiter passed by outside. Jamal was slumped in his chair, staring at a glass of water, his face a mask of misery. He knew I was in the building, but he clearly had not told his father. He was too cowardly to deliver the bad news, hoping that maybe I would just disappear, or that security had actually thrown me out. Winston slammed his hand down on the back of an empty leather chair, making Chloe jump. "This is unacceptable," he barked, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "It is 8:15. Jonathan said the vice president would be here at 8 sharp. Do they not know who I am? I have the governor waiting outside to toast to this deal. These finance people have no respect for legacy." He turned to Darius, glaring at his son-in-law. "Call them again, Darius. Tell them if they are not here in 2 minutes, I am walking out. There are plenty of other funds begging to lend me money. Darius fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. Dad, I tried. It goes straight to voicemail. Maybe there is traffic. Traffic? Winston scoffed. They should have taken a helicopter. This is a $200 million deal. You do not keep Winston St. James waiting in a back room like a common supplicant. I stood on the other side of the frosted glass doors listening to his bluster. It was pathetic. He was bluffing even to his own family, trying to maintain the illusion of control when he had none. I looked at the team standing behind me. 5 of the sharpest legal minds and forensic accountants in Atlanta. They were dressed in charcoal suits, holding briefcases that contained the autopsy of the St. James Empire. They looked like undertakers. Are you ready, Ms. Williams? The lead attorney asked quietly. I smoothed the silk of my red dress. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of victory. Let us go inside, I said. The patient is ready to be operated on. I pushed the doors open with both hands. They swung wide, revealing the tableau of the St. James family. The sudden movement made everyone in the room freeze. Winston spun around, a charming smile already plastered on his face, expecting to see an old white man in a suit. Instead, he saw me. The smile slid off his face like sludge. For a moment, he just stared, blinking rapidly, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual data. He looked at the red dress. He looked at the diamonds. He looked at the 5 grim-faced men standing behind me like a phalanx. Then the confusion turned to rage. You! Winston roared. He took a step forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson that matched my gown. How the hell did you get in here? Security. Where is security? He looked past me at the lawyers, assuming they were the Ritz-Carlton security team. You there, get this woman out of here immediately. She is a stalker. She is harassing my family. I want her arrested. Do you hear me? Arrest her. I did not say a word. I simply walked into the room, my heels sinking silently into the expensive carpet. I signaled to my team. Without speaking a word, they moved with military precision. They walked past Winston, ignoring his shouting, and began setting up at the empty side of the table. They opened their briefcases, pulling out thick binders, stacks of documents, and a portable projector. Winston stopped shouting. He looked at the lawyers, confused by their behavior. What are you doing? He demanded. Why are you putting papers on the table? Who are you people? He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing. Simone, is this your doing? Did you hire actors? Is this some kind of sick joke to embarrass me? You hired a bunch of extras to pretend to be businessmen. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound that held no humor. This is sad even for you. You think this intimidates me. You are nothing but a desperate little girl playing dress-up. Now get out before I lose my temper. I ignored him completely. I walked to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the highest-ranking person in the room. The seat Winston had been eyeing for himself. I pulled the heavy leather chair back. Winston stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Oh, no, you do not, he sneered. That seat is for the director of the Atlas Fund. You are not sitting there. You are fit to serve coffee, maybe, but you do not sit at the table. Jamal finally spoke up, his voice cracking. Dad, just stop, please. Shut up, Jamal, Winston snapped, not looking at his son. I am handling this. He turned back to me, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. I could smell the scotch on his breath. You are going to leave this room right now, he hissed, or I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will crush you. I looked him dead in the eye. The fear I used to feel in his presence was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute certainty. Are you done, Winston? I asked softly. He blinked, surprised by my tone. Excuse me, he sputtered. I said, are you done throwing your tantrum? Because we have business to discuss and you are wasting my billable hours. I stepped around him, moving with a fluidity that left him flat-footed. I sat down in the head chair. I crossed my legs, the red silk of my dress flowing over the armrest. I rested my elbows on the granite table and interlaced my fingers. The room fell deathly silent. Chloe was staring at me with horror, realizing exactly what was happening. Darius looked like he was about to vomit. Jamal had put his head in his hands. Only Winston was still in denial. "Get up!" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Get out of that chair! Who do you think you are?" I reached into my clutch. I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled out a small rectangular card made of heavy ivory cardstock with gold embossed lettering. I slid it across the polished granite table. It spun perfectly, coming to a stop right in front of Winston. He looked down at it. He did not want to read it. He wanted to tear it up. But curiosity is a powerful force. He picked it up. As he read the words, his face went slack. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving them gray and ashen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Read it out loud. "Winston?" I commanded, my voice echoing in the silent room. He did not speak. He just stared at the card, his hands starting to shake uncontrollably. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "Since you seem to have lost your voice, allow me to introduce myself properly." I gestured to the lawyers on my right. "These are not actors, Winston. This is the senior litigation team from the Atlas Fund. And I am not the coffee girl." I stood up slowly, looming over him, as he slumped into his chair. "I am Simone Williams. I am the Director of Due Diligence and Investment Strategy for the Atlas Fund. I am the Vice President you have been waiting for. I am the one who reviewed your loan application. I am the one who audited your books." I paused, letting the weight of the revelation crush him. "And most importantly, Winston, I am the only person in this world who has the power to decide your fate. You called me street garbage. Well, that garbage just became your judge, jury, and executioner." Winston dropped the card. It fluttered to the table, landing face up. "Director Simone Williams." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw it. I saw the terror. He realized that the monster he feared was not the bank. It was me. "Shall we begin?" I said, smiling coldly. "I believe we have a lot to talk about. Starting with your dead wife's signature." The sound of Jamal's crystal water glass hitting the granite table was the only noise in the room. It did not shatter, but it toppled over, sending a cold stream of liquid soaking into the cuffs of his tuxedo. He did not move to clean it up. He just stared at the business card lying in front of his father, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Winston St. James looked as if his heart had stopped beating. The arrogant roar of the lion was gone, replaced by the terrified silence of a man who realizes he is trapped in a cage. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray, the color of old ash. He looked from the card to me and back again, trying to reconcile the image of the girl he had evicted with the woman who now held his life in her hands. I did not give them time to recover. I did not give them time to beg. I nodded to David, my lead forensic accountant. He pressed a single key on his laptop. The large screen behind me hummed to life, cutting through the dim lighting of the boardroom. Winston flinched at the sudden brightness. He tried to speak, his voice coming out as a dry rasp. "Simone, what is this? What are you doing?" I did not answer him directly. I did not look at him with anger or pity. I looked at him with the cold detachment of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "You asked for a loan, Winston," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the room's acoustics. "You claimed your company was suffering due to market conditions. You claimed inflation and supply chain issues were bleeding you dry. But numbers do not lie, and neither do I." I pointed to the screen. The projection showed a complex web of bank transfers. Lines of red and green intersected, connecting the St. James corporate accounts to a series of offshore entities. "Your company is not losing money because of the market," I continued, walking slowly around the table. "Your company is bleeding because it is being stabbed in the back. By your own family." I gestured to the first column of data. Meet Apex Supply Solutions, a shell company registered in Delaware. Over the last 3 years, St. James Construction has paid Apex over $4 million for materials that were never delivered. No steel, no lumber, just invoices for air. Winston squinted at the screen. I never signed off on those vendors, he whispered. No, you did not, I replied. But your chief financial officer did. Or rather, the man acting as your CFO. The screen changed. It showed the incorporation documents for Apex Supply. The signature at the bottom was small but legible. Darius Miller. Winston slowly turned his head to look at his son-in-law. Darius was shaking so hard his chair was vibrating against the floor. He could not look Winston in the eye. Darius Winston said, his voice rising. What is this? Tell me this is a mistake. But I was not done. Darius is not smart enough to do this alone, I said, cutting in. He needed someone to manage the money once it left the country. Someone who likes expensive things. Someone who likes to vacation in the Cayman Islands. The screen shifted again. This time it showed a bank statement from a private account in Grand Cayman. The beneficiary name was highlighted in yellow, Chloe Miller. The room gasped. It was a collective sound of shock. Chloe let out a small whimper, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if trying to hide from the light of the projector. You have been funding their lifestyle. Winston, I said ruthlessly. That Porsche Darius drives. Your money. Those vacations to Tuscany. Your money. That dress Chloe is wearing right now. Your money. They stole $4 million from you while you were busy blaming the economy. Winston stood up. He moved clumsily, knocking his chair backward. He looked at Chloe with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. Is this true? He roared. Chloe, answer me. Chloe started to cry. It was not a cry of remorse. It was the ugly cry of someone who got caught. I did not mean to, she sobbed. We were just borrowing it. We were going to put it back. Winston, please listen. But I was already moving to the next slide. Sit down, Winston, I commanded. I am not finished. He looked at me, his eyes wild, but he sat. He was broken, but he needed to see the rest. We have established that your daughter-in-law is a thief, I said. Now let us talk about your son. The heir apparent. The boy you wanted to marry the governor's daughter to save your reputation. Jamal flinched. He looked up at me, pleading with his eyes. Simone, please do not. Not this. I ignored him. I pressed the button. The screen filled with credit card statements. These were not the corporate expenses for lumber or concrete. These were expenses from the St. James corporate black card, the card entrusted to Jamal for business development. The list was long and sordid. $200,000 in 6 months. Nightclubs in Miami. Private jets to Las Vegas. Luxury watches, and pages upon pages of payments to an agency called the Elite Companionship Group. I let the words hang in the air. You told the governor that Jamal was a man of virtue, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. You told Vanessa that he was a traditional man. But it seems Jamal prefers to pay for his company. And he prefers to pay for it with your payroll funds. I pointed to a specific line item. $50,000 for a weekend party at the Palms Casino. The same weekend you laid off 15 workers because you said you could not afford their wages. Winston looked at Jamal. His face was no longer red. It was white. He looked like he was going to vomit. Jamal, Winston whispered, Tell me these are client entertainment expenses. Tell me this was for business. Jamal opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Vanessa's empty chair, then at his father, then at the floor. The shame was absolute. He stole from you, Winston, I said, driving the final nail into the coffin. He stole from the workers. He stole from the legacy you care so much about. And he did it all while judging me for shopping at a discount store. The silence in the room was shattered by a screech. You liar. Chloe stood up, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her eyes bulging. This is fake. She forged these documents, Winston. She is jealous. She wants to ruin us because Jamal dumped her. None of this is real. You cannot prove any of this. She turned to Winston, grabbing his arm. Do not believe her, Winston. She is a street rat. She made this up on her computer. There is no proof. I watched her flail. It was pathetic. No proof, I repeated calmly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sleek remote control. I suppose paper trails can be forged, Chloe. You would know all about that. But technology is a little harder to fake. I pressed play. The audio system in the boardroom crackled to life. It was a high-quality recording, crystal clear. The voice that filled the room was unmistakable. It was Chloe's voice. I do not care if the audit is coming, Darius. Just move the money to Cayman. The old man is too busy trying to get a loan to notice. He thinks I am perfect. He will never suspect me. Just do it. Chloe froze. Her hand dropped from Winston's arm. Then another voice played. It was Darius. What about Simone? She is asking questions. And then Chloe's voice again, sneering and cruel. Pay her off. Give her $10,000. She is poor, she will take it. And if she does not, we will just get Winston to crush her. He listens to everything I say. The recording ended. I looked at Chloe. She was trembling, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. I have the video from the bank too, I said softly. And I have the footage from the coffee shop where you tried to bribe me. I walked over to the table and leaned in close to her. You called me a liar, Chloe. But the only thing lying in this room is you. Lying to your father-in-law, lying to the IRS, and now lying to yourself if you think you are walking out of here a free woman. Winston slowly turned to look at Chloe. The betrayal in his eyes was total. He pulled his arm away from her as if she were contagious. You called me the old man, he whispered. You said I was too stupid to notice. Chloe sobbed, stepping back, shaking her head. No, Winston, it was a joke. I was stressed. Get away from me, Winston shouted, his voice breaking. Get away from me, both of you. He looked around the room at his son, at his daughter-in-law, at the ruin of his family. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in his life, Winston St. James looked at me with fear. What do you want, Simone? He asked, his voice trembling. You have exposed them. You have won. What do you want? I smiled, and it was the smile of the reaper. I do not want anything from you, Winston, I said, walking back to the head of the table. Because you have nothing left to give. But we are not done yet. There is one more signature we need to discuss. I pointed to the final document on the screen. The loan application with the forged signature of his dead wife. And this one, Winston, is going to cost you more than just money. The sound of the slap echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot. Winston St. James had lost the last shred of his composure. He swung his hand with the full force of his rage, connecting solidly with Jamal's cheek. My ex-boyfriend stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock, clutching his face as he collided with the mahogany sideboard. But Winston was not done. He turned on Darius, who was trying to sink into his chair and vanish. Winston grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive suit and hauled him to his feet, shaking him like a rag doll. You idiots! Winston screamed, his face turning a terrifying shade of purple. You parasites! I built this company from nothing. I worked 18-hour days for 40 years, and you destroyed it. You gutted my legacy for sports cars and handbags. He shoved Darius away, sending him crashing into Chloe, who let out a sharp cry of pain. I am going to sue you, Winston roared, spitting the words at his own children. I am going to press charges against all of you. You are not my family. You are thieves. He turned back to the table, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. He was trying to pivot, trying to separate himself from the sinking ship. Simone, listen to me, he panted, smoothing his disheveled hair. You see what I am dealing with. I am the victim here. I did not know. You cannot punish the company for the actions of these criminals. I will fire them. I will fire them all right now. Just give me the loan. I can rebuild. I am Winston St. James. I always rebuild. I watched his performance with cold detachment. It was impressive how quickly he turned on his own blood to save his skin. But it was time to end the charade. I slowly stood up and walked around the table until I was standing right next to him. I looked down at the final document on the projector screen. "You are not a victim, Winston," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "You are the architect of this disaster." I pointed to the signature line on the loan application. "You want to blame your children for stealing. Fine. They are thieves. But let us talk about this signature. Eleanor St. James." Winston froze. The color that had returned to his face drained away instantly, leaving him looking like a ghost. "My legal team pulled the death certificate." I continued, my voice hard and unforgiving. "Your wife died 5 years ago, Winston. Ovarian cancer. I remember Jamal crying at the funeral. I remember you giving the eulogy about how she was the moral compass of your life." I leaned in closer, my eyes locking onto his. "So tell me, Winston, how did a dead woman sign a collateral agreement last Tuesday?" The room fell silent. Even Chloe stopped crying. Jamal looked up from the floor, staring at his father with a new kind of horror. "You forged it," I whispered. But in the quiet room, it sounded like a shout. "You knew the bank would not accept the property as collateral without the CO trustee's signature. So you signed her name. You desecrated her memory to get your hands on more money." Winston opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked small. He looked old. "You are not a victim," I repeated. "You are an accomplice. You knew the company was failing. Maybe you did not know about the Cayman accounts, but you knew you were insolvent. And instead of declaring bankruptcy with dignity, you tried to defraud the Atlas Fund. You tried to steal $200 million to cover up your failure." Winston slumped into his chair. He put his head in his hands. "I had to," he croaked, his voice broken. "I could not let it fall. It is my name on the building, Simone. It is all I have." I looked at him, the man who had called me street garbage. I felt no pity. I only felt the cold satisfaction of justice. I walked back to the head of the table. I reached into my purse and pulled out a pen. It was a Mont Blanc, a heavy, expensive instrument of power, the same kind of pen Winston used to sign his checks. I held it up, letting the light catch the black resin barrel. Winston looked up. He saw the pen. A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. It was pathetic and desperate, but it was there. He thought maybe, just maybe, I was going to show mercy. He thought that because I had loved his son, I might spare the father. "Simone," he whispered, sitting up straighter. "Please. I learned my lesson. I will pay it back. I swear. Just sign the check. Save us." I clicked the cap off the pen. The sound was sharp and final. I lowered the tip toward the document on the table. Winston held his breath. Jamal pulled himself up from the floor, watching with wide eyes. Chloe stopped breathing. For a second, the entire fate of the St. James dynasty hung in the balance of my hand. I hovered the pen over the signature line. "You want me to save you, Winston?" I asked softly. "Yes." He begged, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, please." I looked at him one last time. I smiled. And then I wrapped both hands around the expensive pen. With a sharp, violent snap, I broke the pen in two. Ink exploded onto my hands, staining my fingers like black blood. The sound of the plastic shattering echoed in the silent room like a bone breaking. I threw the broken pieces into the trash can next to me. "Use your own pen, Winston," I said, my voice turning to ice, "because you are not getting a dime from us." Winston let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. But I was not done. The rejection of the loan was just the beginning. The real pain was about to start. I turned to the lead attorney. "Execute the order." The lawyer nodded and typed a command into his laptop. I turned back to the family, who were now huddled together in their terror. "You thought I was just here to deny your loan application," I said, pacing in front of them. "But you forgot one thing about the finance world. Debt is a commodity. And when I saw how much trouble you were in, I made a few calls." I picked up the remote and changed the slide on the screen. It showed a legal transfer document stamped with the seal of the Atlas Fund. St. James Construction owed $50 million to Bank of America, I explained. It was bad debt. Distressed assets. The bank was worried you would default, so they were happy to sell that debt to us for pennies on the dollar. Winston's eyes bulged. No, he gasped. No, you cannot do that. We already did, I replied. As of this morning, the Atlas Fund is your primary creditor. We own your debt, Winston. And since you are in default on your payments, and you have just admitted to fraud, I am exercising our right to accelerate the debt. I slammed my hand down on the table. I want my $50 million, Winston, and I want it now. We do not have it, Winston cried. You know we do not have it. I know, I said coldly. Which brings me to the next phase, asset forfeiture. Suddenly, a cacophony of noise erupted in the room. It was not voices, it was phones. Winston's phone buzzed on the table. Jamal's phone pinged in his pocket. Chloe's phone lit up in her clutch. They all scrambled to check their devices. Chloe screamed first. She dropped her phone as if it burned her. My cards, she shrieked. They are declined. All of them. My credit lines are frozen. Jamal looked at his screen, his face pale. My trust fund. It says zero balance. Access denied. Simone, what did you do? I did not do anything, Jamal. I said calm amidst the chaos. The algorithm did it. Once we filed the lien against your assets, the banking system automatically froze your personal accounts to prevent capital flight. You are broke, Jamal, all of you. Winston stared at his phone, reading the notification from his private banker. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped the device. My house, he whispered. My boat. Gone, I confirmed. We are seizing everything to recoup the debt. The mansion, the cars, the jewelry you are wearing right now. It all belongs to the Atlas Fund. By Monday morning, you will be lucky if you have enough money to buy a bus ticket. You cannot do this, Winston yelled, lunging across the table. I will kill you. I will kill you. My security team stepped forward, blocking him easily. Winston collapsed onto the table, sobbing uncontrollably. The king had fallen. But the night had one final surprise. The doors to the boardroom burst open. The music from the gala outside flooded in for a brief second before being cut off by the presence of 4 men in windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. FBI. The lead agent walked into the room. He did not look at me. He looked straight at the St. James family. He walked over to Darius and Chloe, who were clinging to each other in the corner. Darius Miller. Chloe Miller, the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Chloe screamed and tried to run behind Winston, but the agent grabbed her arm. She kicked and screamed as he snapped the cuffs on her wrists. I am innocent, she wailed. It was his idea. It was all Darius. Darius looked at her with pure hatred as he was cuffed next to her. The agent then turned to Winston, who was still slumped over the table. Winston St. James, the agent said. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding bank fraud, forgery of legal documents, and conspiracy. Winston looked up. He looked at the agent. Then he looked at me. I stood there, my hands still stained with the ink from the broken pen. I did not look away. Please, he whispered to me. Simone, we are family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tried to destroy me. No, Winston, I said softly. We are not family. I am just the auditor, and your account is closed. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the screams and the sound of handcuffs behind me. I walked back into the gala, where the band was still playing, oblivious to the fact that the St. James Empire had just ceased to exist. The chaos inside the boardroom was a symphony of destruction, and for the first time in my life, I enjoyed every note of it. The air, which had been stifling only moments ago, was now thick with the sounds of justice being served. Chloe was screaming shrill and piercing as the FBI agent tightened the handcuffs around her wrists. She was thrashing against him, her cream dress twisting around her legs, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets. She looked at Darius, who was being led away in silence, his head hung low in defeat. "It was not my fault," she wailed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I did what I was told. Winston made me do it. Darius made me do it. I am a victim here. Please, you cannot take me to jail. I have a Pilates class tomorrow." The absurdity of her plea made me shake my head. Even in handcuffs, she was deluded, clinging to a life that had already evaporated. Across the table, Winston St. James was crumbling. The titan of Atlanta construction, the man who bullied waitstaff and bribed politicians, was gasping for air. He clutched his chest, his face a mask of pale sweat. It was not a heart attack, I realized. It was a panic attack. It was the physical manifestation of his ego dying. A paramedic team that had been waiting on standby alongside the federal agents moved in to check his vitals. They were putting an oxygen mask over his face, muffling his moans. He looked at me one last time through the fog of the plastic mask. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying realization. He was not just losing his money, he was losing his name. I turned away from them. There was nothing left to say. I had not come here to gloat. I had come to settle a ledger, and the balance was now 0. I walked toward the open doors, my red silk dress flowing behind me like a victory banner. The music from the ballroom was still playing, a cheerful, upbeat jazz number that clashed violently with the scene behind me. "Simone, wait." The voice was desperate, breathless. I did not stop walking. I knew that voice. It was the voice of the man who had sat in silence while I was humiliated. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps running behind me, then the sound of knees hitting the carpet. "Please, Simone, stop." I felt a tug on my dress. Jamal had thrown himself onto the floor, grabbing the hem of my gown with both hands. He was anchoring me, trying to drag me back into his world. I stopped. I did not turn around immediately. I looked down at the red silk pulled taut by his grip. It felt heavy, as if the weight of his cowardice was trying to stain the fabric. I slowly pivoted on my heel. Jamal was on his knees looking up at me. His tuxedo was disheveled, his tie crooked, and his face was wet with tears and sweat. He looked nothing like the prince of the city he pretended to be. He looked like a frightened child. "Simone, please," he begged, his voice trembling. "You cannot leave me like this. You know I love you. You know I never wanted this." I stared at him, my expression unreadable. "You love me," I repeated flatly. "Is that why you let your father throw money at me? Is that why you stole from your own company to pay for women in Vegas?" "That was a mistake," he cried, tightening his grip on my dress. "I was lost, Simone. I was under so much pressure. Dad forced me into everything. He forced me to date Vanessa. He forced me to spend that money to keep up appearances. I was a victim too. I was manipulated just like you were." He crawled an inch closer, pressing his face against the silk of my dress. "But we can fix this. You have the power now. You can call off the lawyers. You can unfreeze my trust fund. We can start over, baby. Just you and me. I will be better. I swear. I will be the man you deserve. We can run this city together. Think about it, Simone. You and me, the power couple of Atlanta." I looked down at him, feeling a wave of pure disgust wash over me. It was not anger anymore. It was nausea. He actually thought he could charm his way out of this. He thought that because I had once loved him, I was stupid enough to save him. He saw me not as a person, but as a resource. Before, I was a resource for rebellion against his father. Now I was a resource for his survival. I reached down. Jamal's eyes lit up with hope. He thought I was reaching to pull him up to embrace him. Instead, I placed my hand on his wrist. My fingers were cool and firm. I peeled his fingers off my dress one by one. He resisted at first, but my grip was unyielding. I removed his hand from my person as if I were removing a piece of gum that had stuck to my shoe. I held his hand in the air for a second, letting him feel the distance between us, and then I dropped it. It fell limply to his side. I took a step back, creating a chasm between us that no apology could ever bridge. Jamal, I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. Do you remember what your father called me at dinner last week? Jamal blinked, confused by the question. Simone, please, that was him, not me. He called me street garbage. I continued, ignoring his interruption. He said I was trash in a borrowed dress. He said I belonged in the gutter. I smoothed the fabric of my gown where his sweaty hands had wrinkled it. You all laughed. You thought it was funny because you thought power was something you were born with. You thought money was a shield that could never be broken. I leaned down slightly, looking deep into his watery eyes. But here is the reality, Jamal. I worked for everything I have. My power is mine. My money is mine. My name is mine. I pointed toward the boardroom where the agents were leading his family away. Your father is going to prison. Your brother and sister-in-law are going to prison. And you. I paused, letting the silence stretch out. Your accounts are frozen. Your credit cards are canceled. The penthouse you live in is technically corporate housing owned by St. James Construction, which is now owned by the Atlas Fund. My team is changing the locks as we speak. Jamal's jaw dropped. No, you cannot. Where am I supposed to go? I stood up straight, looking down at him from my full height. I do not know, Jamal. But it is a warm night. I am sure you can find a park bench somewhere. I turned my back on him. Because Jamal, I added, throwing the words over my shoulder. Now you are the one who is homeless. You are the street garbage now. I walked away. Behind me I heard him scream my name, a ragged, desperate sound that was quickly swallowed by the murmurs of the crowd in the lobby. I walked through the hotel lobby. The other guests, the socialites, and politicians parted for me like the Red Sea. They had seen the FBI agents. They had seen the fall of the St. James family. And they looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I did not acknowledge them. I did not need their validation. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the night. The air in Atlanta was sweet and humid. The storm from the previous days had cleared, leaving a sky full of stars that twinkled above the city lights. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with freedom. It tasted better than any champagne. At the curb, the valet was waiting, but it was not my Honda Civic he was standing next to. It was a sleek silver Rolls-Royce Phantom, the company car that I had finally decided to use. The valet, a young man who looked terrified, opened the heavy rear door for me. Ms. Williams, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Good evening. I smiled at him. It was a genuine smile, warm and tired. Good evening, I replied, slipping into the plush leather interior. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion, but also a profound sense of peace. The nightmare was over. The debt was paid. The driver, a stoic man named Marcus, looked at me in the rearview mirror. Where to, Ms. Williams? He asked. Home. Or perhaps back to the office. I opened my eyes and looked out the window at the city moving past. I thought about the expensive French dinner I had missed at the gala. I thought about the champagne I had left untouched. I realized I did not want any of it. I did not want luxury. I wanted something real. I thought about the little spot on Ponce de Leon Avenue, the place with the neon sign, and the line out the door where the grease smelled like heaven, and the sweet tea was basically syrup. No, Marcus, I said, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. Take me to Mary Mac's tea room. Marcus blinked, surprised. The soul food place, ma'am. Yes, I said, kicking off my red heels and curling my toes into the carpet. I want the best fried chicken in the city, and a side of mac and cheese. I am starving. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling in the mirror. Fried chicken it is, ma'am. As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city that I had just conquered, I laughed softly to myself. Winston St. James had lost his empire trying to be something he was not. I had won mine by remembering exactly who I was. And as I watched the lights of Atlanta blur by, I knew that this was not just a happy ending, it was a new beginning, and it was going to be delicious. The collapse of the Saint James Empire serves as a powerful reminder that true legacy is built on integrity, not arrogance. Winston and his family believed their status made them untouchable, mistaking my silence for weakness and my background for a liability. They learned too late that the people we underestimate often hold the keys to our future. My journey proves that your worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. When you strip away the titles and the borrowed dresses, character is the only currency that truly matters. If you have ever had to reclaim your power from those who tried to diminish you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Have you ever silenced a doubter with your own success? I would love to read your story in the comments below.